And we're back again. This time it is ludum-dare 46, and I'm going to do a bit of a post-mortem for the game that I created as part of that. This is Hunters and Haunters. It was a jam submission created over 72 hours, though I was the only developer, and other than some reused assets, it was mostly compo rules. So this is the game. If it's still during the rating period and you're watching this, you should first play the game and rate it before watching this. Otherwise, I don't want to influence your opinions on this or, whatever. So please go ahead and do that first, then come back. Okay? I'll wait. Okay. So let's jump in. What is this game? This is a turn-based, card-driven RPG that is very heavily influenced by board games. So this is a turn-based game. It is my turn. This is kind of in the pandemic model, or there's various other board games that are like this, where I take my turn and then bad things happen. I take my turn, bad things happen. Each turn I have all of these heroes here that I can choose to take actions with, and they all have 3 actions on their turn. They can move, or they can play cards, and some cards require more actions than others. Moving is 1 action. So if I move 3 times, that's my turn. So I can move this character into this location, moves him in there. There's an enemy there. That enemy engages with the player, and I'm gonna I'm just gonna shoot him and nuke him. Great. Earn some experience for doing that. That's just something I can do. But the main goal here is I'm investigating this this cult thing, ritual going on. I'm trying to disrupt it. So I'm looking around town, and I've come over. So if I investigate this, that's going to complete this quest to investigate this area. And we're going to get some dialogue. Some stuff's going to happen. And it looks like some monsters spawned back here. One of my other characters is, there and can do some special attacks to deal with these guys. So that's the basic game loop. You take your turn. When you're done, your next turn, things happen. As you go, there's this threat meter up here. Once you reach a certain threshold, kind of past the tutorial stage, this will start appearing. And every turn, monsters will spawn around the board. And as this fills up, it leads into additional quests. So eventually, the idea is that, well, there's something evil going down, and these characters don't really know necessarily what that is, but that evil thing is going to keep working regardless. It's a time pressure, ultimately, to force you to take action and move forward. When it reaches the end, actually, there's multiple stages of this. When it reaches the end of the 3rd stage, then a monster will spawn over here at the cemetery, and it will attempt to travel 1 turn at a time across town to the hotel. That's kind of where the theme of this game comes in, is you are trying to keep this person alive who is at the hotel, who has left this cult, and this ritual spawned this monster that's going to attack it, and if it reaches him and kills him, ostensibly bad things are going to happen. It's a flimsy connection to the theme, if I'm honest. Okay, so let's talk about the theme. The theme was keep it alive, and that was a struggle for me. I had kind of nothing, really, and I had nothing going in, and after 2 hours of brainstorming, which was more than twice what I usually would like to have during a ludum-dare event, I still had kind of nothing. I was I'm gonna do this board game thing because it's flexible and open, and I'll figure out a story connection to the theme along the way. Maybe there'll be, you're trying to keep somebody alive. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. There you go. So after 2 hours, I kind of knew roughly what maybe the mechanics were, but I wasn't thinking of this cyberpunk abstract city. I was thinking of Paris, actually, as the location, and that's what I had for a little while. The initial version of the map was going to be something like this map of Paris that is, it's been distorted and some stuff to kind of get it into a nice style, but I was going to go with, well, let's set it in Paris. Maybe Paris in, I don't know, modern times, at the 70s, or maybe occupied Paris. I could do some, resistance sort of stuff. Maybe keep the resistance alive, maybe something like that. And actually, I had this in place. Obviously, I had the art asset for it as a map, though it's really low res, and I might have had to redo it. There are two problems. One, I'm not French, and I've only been to Paris, 3 days total. Like, it would be easy to do something really dumb. And two, once I actually started like laying out like positions on the map, it's like, okay, let's use some like monuments and stuff to like, okay, those would be the nodes on this graph map. Great. Well, like, let's zoom in here. Let's put a circle for Notre Dame right here, and then there's like a castle right here, and then there's like maybe a bookstore right here. Like, there's a lot of monuments that are really close together, like a lot of European cities. There's very dense areas, and then there's like, you get out to here, and it's like, well, I guess I could do some like neighborhood names or something around the edges. It literally just wasn't gonna fit on the map. So ultimately, this map was just kind of a bust. It just wasn't gonna work, no matter how hard I tried, I think. At that point, I'd already kind of settled on using this style of art, this style of character art specifically, which are very heavily inspired by another previous ludum-dare entry. In fact, it's kind of the same code and same underlying system, which is like it's a paper doll system where you have the body and the clothing and the hair, and each of those gets a separate color. So I took the code for that paper doll system, but then I was working under the assumption that I would do this as a compo, and I can't just reuse those art assets. So I redrew the body and the hair and the clothing for two characters for those first two. And they look very similar, obviously, because it's the exact same art style, but it's a different art asset. And it's actually up-res. These were, I knew these were going to be this resolution, or like roughly this resolution. And I wanted to do larger resolution for like the dialogue scenes here. So I redrew them with different like body reference and some different hair references. At that point, I was like, well, I'm looking for maps. I don't know what to use. I was really tempted to just use the map that I had used here, and just say this is a jam game, forget it. Because you can kind of see it under here. It was like a map of Arkham that I made for that. But then I found this medieval fantasy town generator on itch.io, which is great. It's designed for medieval fantasy towns, obviously, but there's a number of options in here, and you can disable certain things. So you can like disable walls and get rid of some of the very medieval things and get this sort of abstract city representation that I ultimately used. So I took the asset that was generated by that city generator, did some recoloring, did some like cleanup, up-resed it a little bit, and came up with this map. And then just started, laying stuff out from there, positioning things and making up a city as I went, really. So I was using this paper doll system, but I wasn't planning on reusing any more assets. Maybe I would draw some new monsters in that style just to match, but I wasn't going to reuse them. That's not what happened. Again, I was planning on using the compo rules where I make all the assets within 48 hours, and started by making this guy here, which was brand new, wasn't in the old game, and that was the only one I had sometime late on Sunday, and it was one of the things that was like, this is not going to be done in the compo deadline. It's just not happening. I had too much left to do. So I started pulling in more of the art assets. So specifically the monster assets from this previous game. This is the like final boss in Hunters and Haunters. So I ended up reusing that art ultimately. I was kind of struck at a certain point by just like how little actual art is in here. Like there's some other new icons that I created for this, but really it's like there's the map, which is really just one thing, which was used procedural generation, the monsters, the heroes, and the icons, and that's kind of it. There's not a lot of art actually in the game, which is surprising because there's a lot of overlap with this old game that looks really hideous. Like in retrospect, like I can't believe this is the screenshot I chose for it, but this game was much uglier. Like I think I took these assets and did a much better job, and I took the style and did a much better job. I'm definitely far happier with how this looks than that old game. Mechanically, these are very different. It's just the art specifically what I wanted to talk about. So I knew I wanted, mechanically, that sort of cooperative board game thing where it's you all take your turns and then bad stuff happens. You all take your turn, bad stuff happens. that sort of style of game is definitely what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to do some sort of a hand management. You have a hand of cards, and then you have to take an action. You have to maybe take your whole turn to pick all your cards back up. That's kind of what I wanted to explore. Probably some sort of action economy and maybe some choice of movement or cards, something like that. The thing is, this is a digital game, and so it doesn't have some of the things that make sense in a board game. So I've definitely had to adjust things on the fly and kind of figure out, like, what does it mean? What do those mechanics mean when you're talking about a single player computer game? Because some of those just don't make sense. Like, there's definitely kind of some inspiration from Arkham Horror's like clue gathering system, and that makes sense in a board game sense, where you'd like just gathering these abstract physical tokens that represent things you've discovered, but it's very abstracted. But it's fine because it's a physical object and you all sort of understand that it's abstraction. Versus in a video game, like, I don't think that flies. So definitely had to come up with some stuff along those lines. But like, that wasn't really something I planned in advance. It was really like, I know I want the bad stuff happens to you at the end of the turn, and like hand management. Everything else definitely figured out as I went. When in doubt, I think I defaulted probably to Arkham Horror, the LCG, a lot. And if you've played that game, you'll recognize a number of the things, like littler things that are taken from that game. The threat meter, for instance, was one where it's very similar to Arkham Horror, the LCG. I knew I wanted some sort of time pressure, right? I wanted something to say, you have to keep moving, you have to keep doing stuff. You can't just sit here and slowly level up or whatever. You got to keep moving. And I tried a couple different things that are like, well, didn't try a couple things. I thought through a couple different things, and none of them really stood out. And really, that the Arkham model is like, okay, every turn there's this threat that's happening, and it's just getting like machinations are happening in the background, and you're not aware of them, and you can't control them necessarily. But when they reach a certain point, things happen because the evildoers are doing things. And that's pretty much exactly what this is. Like, one of the thoughts was maybe like there's just a cap on the number of enemies, but like, you get 12 enemies and it's like, well, the cap's 15, 3 more spawn, and now you're, basically dead. Or it kind of would emphasize like, well, there's 15 enemies, let's take care of the easy ones, and the hard ones I can just ignore or something. Like, I couldn't come up with a better system to kind of mitigate it, to kind of force the player into action. So that was definitely heavily inspired from that. Including though, like, this is just a rolling, there's 3 actual segments of this progress bar is definitely taken from that. Because that seems to be kind of a common thing, is, the Doom track gets to the end and it's like, well, bad stuff happens, but now there's another one. That specifically I took because, like, well, you could have just had a whole progress bar where there's things going on in the background, or a turn counter or something, but it would probably feel like, oh, there's infinite time until there's not. And this also, when you get to the end, if you get to the end of the like series of investigations before the end of the threat meter, a bunch of cultists spawn. And the idea was like those would, those increase the amount of threat you get per turn. So that, like, if you manage to get here early, that would kind of force this to get to the end quickly. It didn't necessarily work out in practice, but that was kind of the idea. One of the things that was new for me was like a quest system. I've never had a game for like ludum-dare or otherwise that's really had a complex quest system, and that's actually one of the things I want to show in the code. So I needed something, quick, and I needed something that was going to work for this, at least this jam game, if not later. So let's see. I guess here's an example of a quest, right? This is a template that has an async function, and this is the actual quest itself. All of the like steps are just code, and it uses asynchronous logic to just say, wait a bit, check in later. Most of them start with like kind of a precondition, and so all of these are like queued up right at the start of the game when you start a new game. And every time there's a bunch of points where in the main game loop it'll say check for quests, and at each one of those it'll go through all of the active quests and say, hey, is this condition met? is there a player at the library? And then once there is a player at the library, then this code can continue, and it'll show these dialogue statements, and it'll reveal some locations. It'll kind of zoom the camera to them, and then it will wait until you take somebody there. Sorry, I just noticed this variable's unused. Bad developer. So there's a bunch of these quests, and this is the one side quest I ended up creating. I was planning on making a bunch. If we go up to the main quest, this is actually broken up into a series of individual functions. Like here's this first like stage, here's the second stage, and like the second stage is waiting for the first one to complete before it goes. And there's just this chain of these things. I did that because each of these has there's a quest object in the world that is associated with each of these running functions, and that quest object is reflected in this quest list here, which was fine and simple and good until I realized, oh wait, I want like this disrupt the cult's ritual quest to like just be active, and then some other like things appear. And I didn't have a way to just make one on the fly, really, so I ended up breaking it up into smaller functions, which was actually handy ultimately, because then I could, when I was debugging, I would let me like skip some of these, and that's kind of what some of this code is doing, is like pretend this function just finished and evaluated. This is not a particularly scalable system for sure. Partially because of that, there's no way to like pick up in the middle really. If I wanted to save the state of a quest, it just wouldn't work. But for ludum-dare, this was fine, and it worked pretty well. It was also one of the biggest sources of bugs, as we'll talk about later. Agenda, this threat meter, is also implemented as a quest. It's kind of just a special case. It renders slightly differently. It just goes through some stuff, and then there's a specific trigger that this is waiting for the end turn trigger, as opposed to like after every action you take trigger. To determine what to do. But ultimately it's pretty similar. I even called it a mythos phase, which is very much lifted from Arkham Horror. Usually I don't have like a story section in these postmortems because I don't tell a story in a lot of the games I create, but this one had a lot of story, so I figured I'd talk a little bit about it. Initially, like I said, I knew somehow I needed to tie this game and these mechanics to the theme of Keep It Alive, and so, you know, save the city from the undead. I don't know. And eventually that turned into, we'll save this one person from this one monster to save the city from ghosts or something. Unfortunately, some of that stuff doesn't really appear until you're a ways into the game itself, so it's kind of like, it's a real weak tie to the theme, obviously, but whatever. So I knew that was kind of the ending, I guess, was there was going to be this boss, but I didn't really know how to get there. So I literally just started from the beginning and just started writing and was like, all right, here's where I'm headed, fill in the blanks. So I started by creating the two first characters. Jax, I kind of imagined was like, I imagined him a little bit like maybe Stephen Fry's character in Godsford Park, which is an odd reference, but he's a bumbling detective who's a complete idiot, terrible at his job, and everybody just interrupts constantly. Some of that came off. Some characters have just no time for him and are just like, here's what you need, keep moving. But I think very quickly he just turned into Harry Dresden. Like, there's no way around it. I mean, he's like a investigator, magic user. Yeah, I kind of had to at a certain point when in one of the dialogues was like, yeah, he just knows magic. I don't know how else to solve this problem. I don't have time to think about it. And then Lily was kind of the hired muscle that helped him out around the investigation office. I left it ambiguous as to what they did in the game because I don't really know. Then I needed to... So mechanically, he was going to be like the investigator character she would be like combat character that kind of tutorialize itself a little bit. And then I needed a character to kind of show off this like lock picking thing that I knew I was going to do. Or at least I thought I was going to do. So I needed like a rogue sort of a character. And for some reason, the name Reza popped into my head. That would have been a better name for like a healer. But I immediately started writing him in like fakey British and just was having fun with that. So I kept going. Then everybody else is pretty one note and doesn't have a lot to say. I wanted some sort of a healer at the clinic. So Ollie, I don't know, that's a name, and sure, he's a nurse. And I knew I needed a magic user because I wanted to have magic cards in the game, so made this like punk rock character. I have to take a step back here. I had a lot of fun laying out all of these positions around the map. That was a lot of fun. Like, oh, what could this area be? What could this be? What could this be? And in my head, like, I have a detailed explanation of what are these regions like that it is not exposed, and I did not have time to write, and kind of whatever. But in my head, that helped me fill in the blanks. And so I kind of imagined the area where this guy spawns, which was like kind of logically the next area that would unlock, was kind of going to be like the poor area. So I was like, yeah, he's some like crusty punk sort of a magic user that's down and dangerous, but looking out for the guys around town. Then this isn't really reflected in the game much, but I was thinking I would have more cards that were like tech focused, like, oh, we put up a drone and it investigates for you, or an auto turret or things like that, like tech stuff. So I knew I wanted somebody like that, and design this character of Addie, who I don't have unlocked here, but who would be at the college. By the time I got to like writing her and the last character, I was very little time. So like I just wrote her like she just knows the main character. The main character doesn't know her, but whatever. She's a no nonsense, just hacker. Probably in my mind, probably channeling the character of Plastic, I think is the name, from Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I don't remember. There's another character that I don't have here, this Rose, that's unlocked at the Opera House. And I mostly created her at the last minute because I had an unused asset for hair that I did during the compo period. Is like, oh, I'll use this hair, and I never used it. I was going to use it for Addie, and then it didn't work because I gave her like a hoodie. So then I was like, well, I have this asset that I want to use, so I'll use it, and she'll be here, and I don't know. I have no time to write her, so she just knows the main character and is like some old flame, and leave it ambiguous. I don't know. Sounds good. In retrospect, the characterization of Jax really doesn't make any sense. Like, he's definitely some sort of investigator of some sort. But then, like, he immediately helps out this guy who is definitely a criminal do some definitely criminal things, and then he definitely breaks into a library. It doesn't make a ton of sense. Don't think about it that hard. I know I didn't. Anyway, let's move on to what went well. First off, I think the game is really well polished. There's a lot of polish to the animations, and there's a lot of this smooth camera movement when you click on somebody, it moves over, and that's cool. And all these things fly in, and there's these hover effects. Some of that I got for free with existing code base that I had. Like, I've got a set of code for dealing with card-like things, but some of that was probably more than it needed to be. But it took a lot of time. That all came, all that polish came with a cost, which I should talk about later. Usually I build a lot of the game content statically, and this was something I did differently here, just kind of on accident almost. Where usually it's if I have a set of characters, say, I will just define the character statically, and for ludum-dare, that's great. I can just reference the static thing, and I don't have to pass a bunch of objects around. For list of locations or something, those aren't going to change that often. And usually if I change something, it's easy enough to just rebuild, run again. like, this is C#, the build times are real fast, and like, I can shortcut the title screen and just jump right in, and, you know, that's usually pretty good. This time I happen to tie it all not quite statically, so everything is tied to a world object, which means that it's not static, which means I can change it and then reload everything in game, which I set up with just pressing a key. It just reloads. I had to check to make sure it doesn't, it's not enabled. But it reloads the world, and so that would let me like tweak the position of this like location slightly, or like make sure that like adjust these connections, like, oh, it doesn't, you know, there's no bridge here, so these probably aren't connected, and futz with that sort of stuff. Because of that, I definitely futzed with things a little bit more. Like I definitely futzed with like the character looks more than probably I should have. Because it's like, oh, you know, let's change the color of her shirt or the color of his hair or something, and, you know, reload. I just, like that ate a little bit of time for sure. But it was really nice to be able to see that change really easily, and that cycle time of, it's the difference between 4 seconds and 10 seconds, but it was kind of nice. But yeah, that was one of the reasons why it was really well polished. The quests, I think, really present well. Like at the beginning, it really walks you through this series of steps, and like the camera pans to here to show you that's where you need to go, and it pans back. And there's a lot of like that camera movement, and there's a lot of little detail like that of stuff appears at the right time and disappears at the right time, and it's pretty well tuned. The initial like set of like missions or like quests that you have at the beginning, I think, are pretty effective at walking you through the mechanics of the game. It like forces you to investigate the old lighthouse, and then it's like, well, at that time Jax can't deal with the thing that spawns, so you have to drag Lily over to this location, so it kind of teaches that mechanic, and then it teaches combat because she's the only one who can attack it. And then like he gets to unlock the rogue character, and then you have to go through this lockpicking thing to kind of get that. And then I can take my hands off. But that first initial tutorial is pretty good at being a tutorial without actually being a tutorial. That took a little bit of time for sure, probably more time than was warranted. But you know, I tuned that as I went, and then kind of iterated on it in small ways a few times to make sure that experience was pretty good without needing a bunch of just tutorial prompts. I also want to say that there's definitely some fun in like the core combat loop. You probably get that the most with the rogue characters, and there's two or three that have some of the skills, but like you can disengage from all enemies, and then there's these things that let you do more damage if you're disengaged. And like you can kind of combo, like, oh, somebody else goes in and then the rogue comes in and backstabs, and there's some fun to be had with that, I think. Like that, the core loop for combat, at least, I think works out pretty well. One other thing that I kind of like is this the system of resting. So let's rest this character, and like every time you rest, you have this opportunity to, well, you can purchase new cards, which is kind of a nice, it's kind of nice, and I'm debating whether that's a good idea or not, but you can adjust your hands with things that are not currently in your hand. And I think I kind of like that idea a little bit of like, oh, you know, I know I'm going to fight the boss, so I'm going to really gear up for that, and while I'm resting, you know, grab some extra weapons and get ready for that thing. One other thing I'm happy with is, overall, I think I managed to tell an okay story, or at least an okay enough story for a game jam. Like, I'm pretty happy with the characters and the characterization and some of the dialogue. It's not going to win any awards, and you may disagree strongly, but I'm pretty happy with it in terms of what I was able to accomplish in the time that I had. So, yeah, on to the bad, I think. What went poorly? Well, all of that polish definitely came with a cost, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but like the cost was time at every level. It was this game is probably too polished. it's kind of, in retrospect, crazy to think that this could have shipped as a compo game. I mean, if I had managed my time better, maybe it could have, and I would have had to have cut certain corners and left certain features out. Like I definitely got pretty detailed in some of like the tooltips that you have, and the animations are maybe fancier than they need to be. Some of the quests are more complicated than they need to be. Was it worth it? Probably. It's probably better to have a better game. This is like the level of quality I would like to achieve. And I think I would be annoyed if it was the quality I could have done in 48 hours. One of the other costs of all that polish was the bugs. There were a lot of bugs. Let me show you my bug list. This is the bug list that I was tracking. Here it is. That's some of it, and some more of it. And there we go. There were so many bugs with this game, and it's fortunate that you can fix bugs with the Jam and Compo, with ludum-dare in general. But that, like, as I shipped it, it wasn't fully playable. And it wasn't even just like there was one bug that like prevented you from finishing it. It was like it would soft lock at multiple stages along the way, because I was just never able to test the whole thing together. It just, a lot of things were broken. The biggest source of bugs definitely was quests. All of this, like, do this, then do that. There's a lot of frailty to this stuff, and it was pretty easy to end up in states where it was like, oh, this condition's never actually hit, or this just errors out, and it would error out in a really annoying silent way that made it hard to debug. But there were a lot of like more subtle errors that were incredibly jarring too, where like it just, let's see some of the examples. Like, well, for example, you would get to a state at one of these quests and it would say, okay, go here. Except I would have forgotten to actually like turn the location on in the map, so you could not have gotten there to finish the quest. Great. And then, like, I forgot to unlock one of the characters, but I never noticed because of the debugger. Like, I had skipped that step, or where that step should have been, and just auto-enabled them when I was doing testing. So there's stuff like that that was just, it added up for sure. So another thing that went poorly was for the characters that are in combat, there's a lot of options. Like, here's a character, this character is currently engaged with these things. They've got a lot of options they can do, but if you're not in combat, there's not as much. It's your turn is not as interesting. And I kind of wanted to do something like Arkham Horror, the LCG, to go back to that again, has the system where somebody's got to gather these clues to progress the story, and that's kind of sort of what I was going for, I guess. But without that like concept of an abstract clue token that you are collecting, your options are more limited, and I don't have a great solution for that. I mean, one thought I have is maybe like if there's a lot of side quests that these characters could do, they could go investigate this, go investigate that, go unlock that, do that. Maybe that would be interesting, but even then, like the actual card play of what they're doing, maybe not, because they're just going to a place and then using a card to investigate. Maybe that's fine because this is a single player thing, and like Arkham Horror the LCG is a multiplayer thing in a lot of cases. Each person who is playing needs to be doing something, needs to be engaged, and they do that through the skill check system and through other things that the people are doing. But yeah, I'm still not sure what I could do to make these characters that aren't in combat all the time more interesting. And I don't have a good answer for that. One of the other problems, I think, is that there are too many dead turns that are just aren't used to their fullest effect. Part of that is the rest card, which you have to have all 3 actions available. Like, that is your whole turn. And that was the idea. That makes sense on paper in a lot, like, where one player is like, that's my turn, I'm doing that, I'm adjusting cards, I'm going and upgrading my hand, whatever. But in a video game, the character just can't do anything, and it's easy to forget that, like, oh right, I needed to rest, but instead I moved and now I can't do that. So I don't know, maybe rest should be 2 actions, or maybe it should only be 1, or maybe there should be a short rest and a long rest. Maybe the rest should be much quicker in terms of like the UI, and you don't adjust your hand so that you're in the flow, and you overlook the fact that one character didn't do anything. I don't know if I like that idea, but there's lots of ways it could go, but I don't know what a better one is. So I knew that there was going to be a problem with dead turns, and that's why I added these basic 2 attack and investigate cards. The idea being that you'd always have an action, you could always make progress, even if everything else was ineligible. But in reality, like, this character can't do anything right now. There's nothing to investigate here. There's nothing to attack here. And because I wanted them to like always be an option available, I almost didn't want to make them cards. I maybe want to make them separate actions so you could always make progress. They're probably too good because you don't discard them. And I guess that brings us into the general balance of the game. And it's a jam game. It is balanced to be easy and completable, even if you are clicking pretty randomly. Like, that is the goal. So it's definitely balanced way too easy. But yeah, these were pretty overpowered, and at least one person noticed. So yeah, ultimately I still have this problem of dead turns, and these didn't really solve it. And even if I ignored rest, the problem is there that, like, if I move a character, so this character has 3 moves available. They can move 1, they can move 2, and like, yeah, I want them to take this guy on, right? That's the ultimate goal. But if I move them now, well, they're just going to get attacked back, and they're not going to have any opportunity to do anything. There's no buff I can use right now. I don't have anything like that, so there's nothing to do. And I don't know, maybe that should turn into energy. I don't know. There's one other example of this problem with dead turns that shows up pretty early on and is like kind of glaring in retrospect, but the lockpick card, which I don't have unlocked right now, it requires 3 actions, kind of like rest. So it's your whole turn, and then it gets discarded. And early on, I ask you to take a character up to the narrows here, unlock a location. You discard it. Okay, next turn, you need to move here. It's 2 steps away. And then you need to unlock a thing when you get there. So that's 1 turn to unlock it, just whole turn. You move, except it's only 2 spots, so you don't want to move anywhere else, but that's your whole turn, just getting there. Then you have to spend a turn to rest to pick it up, and then you spend another turn to use the card to unlock the location. It's kind of hilariously bad in retrospect, and I probably should have adjusted that a little bit, but, decisions. So let's talk about the future of the game. I think I'm going to take this and make a post-compo version. I sometimes do that, I sometimes don't. It depends on if I feel like there's unexplored stuff to the game, but I feel like I'm going to do that this time. I'm going to take the game, add in some of these features that I didn't quite get in. There's a couple things I really want to do that I want to get in and try, and that is, I definitely want to make a lot more side quests and a lot more things to investigate and kind of see how that works for the characters who don't really engage in combat, and is there enough for them to do? Is that interesting enough? I'm kind of thinking maybe like some of those side quests and things give you unique items or other resources that you can give to the other characters for combat. Like maybe you get like a unique item that is specifically good against the final boss, for example. Like I actually built a system for that, and I literally just ran out of time. Like there's a system where you can share unlocked cards, but I didn't create any cards to unlock, so. I definitely also want to create some monsters that just hunt after you, because right now they just sort of statically appear and like, why kill them? There's not much reason. You get some XP, but whatever. So I want some that like aggressively come after you. Maybe sometimes they will randomly cause other things to come after you. Also some monsters that interact with other monsters, so like, maybe a healer for other monsters or something like that. those would be hopefully pretty trivial things to do, so I think I probably just want to do that. So definitely want to add just way more cards, like probably too many cards, so that the characters have a lot of options, and I want to see like what works with this board game style, and see what is fun, what kind of interactions are there, what interactions are fun. Try some stuff out like that. And then there were a few other mechanics that just kind of didn't quite make it, so like I want to have some ranged weapons. Would have been trivial to do, I just literally ran out of time. It was on my to-do list, whatever. Some sort of elemental effects at locations, like maybe an obscuring fog or something that's healing the enemies, or something that makes it harder to kill them, or something like that, but some like static, like location-based effects. I'd also kind of like some sort of enchantments that you can have on yourself, some sort of buffs beyond just the like simple like status effects that you have right now, as well as probably some amount of like restrictions on your hand building, so you can't just waltz in with 40 weapons on you, you know, that sort of stuff. So one of the big questions at the end of these ludum-dares for me is like, is this something I would want to take further? Is it something I would want to make into a full game? Which for me would be like a commercial release or something along those lines. And I think for this one the answer is maybe. It would need to be a very different game in a lot of ways if I was going to go down that route. For example, like you're unlocking characters as you go, and I don't think that makes any sense. Like that is very much I need to tutorialize this, and I don't want to just say here's 5 characters, figure it out. Like that'd be overwhelming for like a jam game. So it's like doling out like, okay, now you have 1 character, now you have 2, now you have 3. And if I was going to ship this as a full release, almost certainly it would be, you know, here, pick 5, bring them in, make it work. Also, I think I would want to have multiple maps and multiple stories, not just this one map and, you know, different takes on the same thing or the same story, switching it up slightly. Like I want to explore a world more than just this. And that raises a lot more questions about what would the larger structure of a complete game be. And I don't know. There's a lot of ways it could go, and I don't have a specific one that really jumps out to me. It could be a single large campaign, maybe. Or it could be like, okay, here's a 5 missions set that you are going through with a set number. Like you pick your characters, go through this set number of missions. Kind of like the Lord of the Rings digital card game, maybe. Alternatively, maybe it should be more standalone scenarios. This is a bit different than some of those other games because there's, well, maybe we will see, but at least I'm thinking there would be more side quests and other things you can do, optionally at least. All of those things have different drawbacks. Like a single campaign, well, you kind of expect more story per character, and that probably means fewer characters, and you can tell a certain kind of story that way, but if it's a series of missions, you're kind of forced to be a little bit more abstract and for each character. Making each scenario independent, I don't think would be the way to go, because that ultimately means like each scenario has to feel self-contained. There has to be a rise and a conclusion, and like if every scenario has a boss at the end, that's maybe not as interesting, I think. It's also like if it's just one mission, you have less to think about. If it's, you know, pick your 3 characters, and it's like, well, I'll just pick the 3 that work really well for this specific mission or whatever. And they're kind of, I think, assuming there's side quests and stuff, like there kind of has to be support for that. It's a little bit harder to, if I wanted to rely on like side quests and other investigations and stuff for the non-combat characters, I think that kind of limits the stories you can tell, because you have to have flexibility for people to go off and do their own thing. It's a little harder to tell like a very linear story if that's like always an expectation that there always be something for those characters to do. I don't know. Another big question is, would I keep this setting? And I don't know. I've looked at this. I've built games within this sort of a setting like 3 times now within just ludum-dare, really. There's the one Arkham game that I highlighted at Arkham 2043, the previous Jam game, but like 2 before that was also like this weird Shadowrun cyberpunk with magic thing. there are considerations that like this art is relatively easy for me to generate to a high quality, and I do like that. But I could also pivot to a number of other things, and then nothing has jumped out at me as like this is, this is where I want to go with this. So to bring it back to the original question of would I build this as a more complete game? Maybe. I don't know. I do enjoy it quite a bit. It was a lot of fun to do. We'll see. I've got a lot of other things to work on too. So anyway, that's all my thoughts on Hunters and Haunters. Is that the name of the game? Whatever it is. The ludum-dare 46 Post-mortem. I think that's all my thoughts. So until next time,